Brenda Bradford Ward is the author of 40 Years to Life, a compelling exploration of the journey of gender identity conflict. And Brenda is with us here. How are you today?
I think I'm great. How about you?
I'm excellent, thank you. So can you provide us with a brief overview of your book, 40 Years to Life, and what inspired you to write it?
Well, 40 Years to Life is quite literal title, and I don't need these. The 40 years was the period during which I was presenting a male and masculine appearance and identity, and no one shared that secret except for a psychiatrist that I tried to see when I was in the Army. And the psychiatrist pointed to a pile of files on his desk and said, "These people need to see me, so you're wasting my time." And so that was a possible opportunity to seek some or get some professional feedback that availed absolutely nothing. And I was kind of paranoid. I was afraid if I would look something up in the library, somebody would catch me at it. It's just a horrible kind of ridiculous paranoia of sorts. And so the 40 years was going through all that nonsense, which is, thank goodness, decades behind. But It's something that people are being sentenced to with laws like those in Florida, where a professional dare not even treat, medically at least, a transgender child. And that really needs to be reversed. We have had an age-old, earliest signs of humanity. I mean, the Roman Emperor Elagabalus offered the whole of Rome to any surgeon who could fashion a vagina in, air quotes, his body, which was absurd. And there have been cases throughout history. The one that seems to have gotten things started more recently is Christine Jorgensen was rather famously appearing in the U.S. as a transgendered person who got surgery in Europe. And I think Magnus Hirschfeld was the person who did that. Magnus Hirschfeld influenced Harry Benjamin, and Harry Benjamin established the standards of care in the U.S. And that organization or set of rules has been pretty much supplanted by WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgendered Health. The reason 40 years actually looks at gender identity conflict from a truckload of perspectives and a 40-year history of trying to figure it out. But it is not at all about waking up some morning and deciding to be something. Gender identity conflict, or any conflict, is an issue that issues that need to be resolved. And I didn't care how my conflict would be resolved, as long as it was.
Yeah.
If 40 years was long enough to be going through all this nonsense and surreptitiously buying things that were not really gender appropriate. So I need to shut up for a minute.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Well, in the book, you talk about a life in hiding that few people will ever experience. So what does this life in hiding entail?
Oh, I love that question. There essentially are two identities as long as we have the conflict. We're presenting a male and masculine appearance because that's what everybody thinks. Well, to some extent, I thought that myself, but I didn't understand the preoccupation, the interest in wanting to wear male gender inappropriate clothes, makeup, jewelry, those things. And no amount of soul searching or, good grief, one can imagine in a dark corner praying with a Bible in hand and remove this conflict from me somehow. That's not a solution. I don't think I ever felt as though I were deficient in any way from a religious standpoint. In fact, when I had begun transition, I had seen my psychiatrist and was wondering how I was going to tell everyone that I was actually Brenda and go outside wearing gender appropriate clothing for Brenda. And it sounds supernatural. It's not real for anyone other than the person who received it. And the message I received was was, it will be all right. Those four simple words, and I accepted them as divine because of their effect. I was in bed and struggling at the time, and those words were exactly what I needed. I wasn't praying or asking for $1 million or world peace or anything. I got a message for exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
So it certainly was not something to which I thought there was a religious solution. And it wasn't a situation where I was deciding on my own without professionally competent help.
Yeah.
That I needed to begin transition. That was the only known, and still is the only known treatment. I think what's coming, Toby, is we know that we can change DNA now with CRISPR technology. And we've got 8 billion examples, well, less the few transgender people there are, of what the DNA spelling for gender and gender identity looks like. It's it's actually the first thing that a fetus begins to develop as it begins to grow. And it should be very evident, taking any statistically significant sample and looking at glaring orange light over here, this is one thing, a glaring blue light over here, this is the other, and whatever small number of deviations there are from the norms. But when we see a misspelling in a transgendered infant, reasonably from a blood test of some sort, we'll at least get the diagnosis, which would help a great deal. It would be dispositive in terms of an awful lot of decisions affecting that transgendered person, but we still don't have a good surgical mitigation. We change the body as much as plastic surgeons know how to, but it's not perfect. I mean, we don't lose a rib, Genesis notwithstanding. It would be interesting if we could go to the Genesis clinic and say whatever. That's maybe mildly amusing, but we're not there surgically. And besides which, in a state like Florida, which is trying to prohibit treatment right now, it's absurd. It's essentially sentencing children to go through puberty in gender inappropriately. So the male to female transgendered person is going to start growing whiskers and the voice is going to deepen and all those very unpleasant things that would not happen if we were going through puberty appropriately. That's still not going to lose the rib. We're still going to begin physically as the way we were born. And that I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it is in utero to correct there so that we have consonant gender identity and physical appearance and structure. So I missed the opportunity to be a natural parent and missed in all kinds of ways. I didn't get to be fully male or fully female. I'm as female as I will ever be, and that's what transition helped me do some decades ago. But it's not a perfect solution by any means. It's far better than what I had before.
Yeah.
I don't have. Has there ever been a time where you thought, "Gee, maybe I'm not really male"? Isn't one of the harshest things that could have been said about you if you were in an athletic activity or something, that you were doing it like you were a girl? Remember how harsh that would be?
Yeah.
And for a transgender person, it's not. It's almost as though somebody found out.
Yeah.
Or more to protect the secret, whatever that was, I can't do it again. And gender identity conflict suppression is like that. There is no deeper suppression than our imposing one on ourselves. And it is tremendously effective, but not constructive. That's the nature of conflicts, whatever they are, that they are things that must be addressed. And my psychiatrist said, well, I didn't have to do anything. Once I had the diagnosis, gender identity conflict, I could just sort of go on as usual. But as usual was presenting male and masculine in public and hiding a very unsatisfactory kind of life, hiding who I was privately. I remember so many times of looking in a mirror with a wig and makeup and whatever, as though I were trying to discover myself in the mirror. And if somebody were doing that in an editorial cartoon or something, they would have the real person on the other side of the mirror.
Yeah.
And I even wondered about titling the book On the Other Side of the Mirror, or Life on the Other Side of the Mirror. But I think that sort of thing has been used before to tell different stories. Have you ever heard of the actress Greta Garbo?
I don't think so, no.
From the 1930s or so?
No.
I know that's a little before you were born, but
yes.
She was the first person really to be known by one name. She was Garbo. Like Cher, well, you may not remember Cher, but some of the one-name people, anyway, Garbo was the first. And she had a tremendous natural ability, I guess, to act. I don't think she had a great deal of formal training. But there's a film she was in called Queen Christina, and she's playing a princess trying to be a prince, being accepted in her kingdom, whatever, as heir apparent to the throne. And of course, she will be a strong leader. But she has an affair with a Russian ambassador, whatever his stature is, and a brief but torrid affair. And she starts to walk through the room after she's begun her relationship with the guy. She walks through a room and she does a terrific job of seeming to see everything for the very first time as she has realized her feminine identity. And I think that story was influenced by Einar Wegner, who wanted to be, or who was in process of becoming Lily Elbe when she died of complications from one of the surgeries. She was a terrific artist, but she was walking away from art because she had become so consumed with the idea of resolving her conflict. And she saw Magnus Hirschfeld, who was instrumental in trying to treat gender identity conflict in Europe, and certainly told some of the story, as others have tried, of what gender identity conflict really is. But in addition to my doing that, to telling my story in the book and examining the condition as some gender identity conflict deniers, and there really are some, from their perspectives. But ultimately, the purpose of 40 Years to Life is this is what people are being sentenced to if they cannot get their conflicts resolved. And again, this is not depending on self-diagnosis. I certainly would not recommend that for anyone. Abigail Schreier wrote a book called Irreparable Harm, What Inappropriate Gender Identity Conflict Transitions Have Been when they should not have been done. And there are a number of schools where that's happening. Schools are treatment centers, I should say. And yeah, the harm is irreparable. If it involves surgery, that means one cannot become a natural parent. So it is as, well, I don't know which is worse, but it is horrible both to do any kind of transition inappropriately, but to avoid doing it where it is appropriate. And it's that latter part that where we have a real problem right now.
Yeah.
Certainly in Florida we do. And we've seen this pendulum swing from nobody knowing what it is to a much more permissive point of, we'll let everybody transition based on the color of their eyes or some abstract number, rather than whether there really is gender identity conflict there or not. And so obviously the pendulum having swung too far in a permissiveness direction, there is this horrible outcry that, oh no, you're doing it inappropriately, which partly was true. But in swinging too far the other way, okay, we're not going to do it transition where it is necessary and where it is appropriate. That's part of the message I'm trying to get out there now. I certainly wish that Governor DeSantis in Florida and that the Florida legislature would realize that for a gender identity conflict, and Paul McHugh, a professor emeritus, retired head of the department at Johns Hopkins, had decided that, well, we have to change people's minds. If they are transgendered, we don't change their bodies. The problem being that monkeying around with the brain to do something like gender identity, we don't know how to do that. But if we did, we don't like people doing that. We don't know how to do it. And if it's done, I don't know, with a fire axe or something, obviously, it's almost like the ultimate cure for cancer. You line some people up against a wall and shoot them.
Yeah.
That'll kill their cancer. And I say this sort of facetiously, but my dad had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and was treated successfully at MD Anderson after really hard work. After he had a year of 2 clinical trials at Anderson, he still had some B-cell cancer that they used Rituxan to eradicate. He was cancer-free when he died because of a world-renowned oncologist who did know what he was doing. Would that we had that kind of education, information about the DNA of transgendered people and could mitigate it, CRISPR technology or whatever. That's ultimately, I think, where we need to go, and the sooner the better.
Your book suggests that to effectively address the problem, we first need to understand it. So,
yes.
What, in your view, are some of the key aspects of gender identity conflict that people maybe often misunderstand or overlook?
Well, in the first place, it's choice. There is no choice involved there. Transgendered people do not choose to be another gender. They certainly don't choose the conflict. They would have that conflict resolved. However, if it meant amputating an arm or leg, or probably the head at the neck, that would be a permanent cure for the conflict. When I was about 5 years old, my mother told me that my dad did not want me to wear my sister's dresses, and why would he?
Yeah.
Of course he didn't want me to, but why was I wearing them? Should have been a better question. And mother was not a stupid person. She was a teacher for 30 some years. But the thought of the day, way back then, was that maybe that I'd either grow out of it, or that it was just primarily that I would grow out. You don't grow out of this. A transgender person ultimately, I guess, is transgendered her or his whole life. And incidentally, there seem to be about 10 times as many male to female as female to male. And that's reasonable. My psychiatrist explained to me that, it makes sense that an egg is going to start out female. It's part of a woman's body. And as the sperm begins to change that, I don't want to get into too much third grade biology.
Yeah.
But it seems that for male to female transgendered people, everything is getting switched as far as the body, whatever, except gender identity. And I think most of us could understand that if all of these things are changing, some small thing not being changed or not being changed wholly or effectively could result in a male to female. For female to male transgender people, and there certainly are some, it's as though everything else remained female except gender identity. And so that clearly speaks to why we would assume there would be far fewer female to male. On the other hand, when there is ambiguous genitalia at birth, it is more often the infant is more often assigned a male gender identity, unless it really seems clear that the infant is physically male. But where there is real ambiguity there, it is often the infant is changed to female because that surgery is more straightforward, is simpler. And if the physicians happen to be right that really is a female, fine, wonderful. But that also might be a source of female to male transgendered people who really were not transgendered, but their gender was changed because of their ambiguous genitalia. And that does happen more often than we would like to believe or admit.
Well, what would you say is the overall message that you hope readers will take away from the book, and what actions or changes do you hope it will inspire for society's approach to the gender identity conflict?
It seems so fundamentally human that we react to something that we don't really understand from fear.
Yeah.
There's no harm here. There's no fear. There should not be any fear. There should be understanding of what the conflict is. It is serious, but it really harshly affects transgendered people whose identity conflicts must be resolved at some point. And there is a tremendous story about, in the book too, but about Gregory Hemingway, one of Ernest's quote, quote, sons. Gregory Hemingway went through transition, male to female, but in kind of reminiscing about a happier time, even with the fabricated identity and a relationship Gregory had with, Gregory became Gloria, had with a woman as Gregory, she actually wanted to revert to the fantasized personality because that was a lifestyle she preferred, but it was not real. And it's the inability of that essential identity to change that causes me to bristle at the term gender fluidity. It's not something I subscribe to. I'm not sure what gender fluidity is supposed to mean, ideally. But from what I would hope people would understand from reading the book is much more about the condition. They can't possibly imagine what the actual experience of the tension in a gender identity conflicted person is, but still they might understand better what the current understanding of the condition is, and not fear it, and understand that, yeah, it does need to be resolved, and it needs to be treated professionally by people who know what they're doing, and certainly not self-diagnosis or go through transition because I say you should, which is absurd. No, gender identity is as much as you're being right-handed or left-handed. It's just in there for those very few people who have it.
Well, is there anything else that you're working on? Do you have any more projects coming up after this book?
Oh, yes. It does feel like a kind of a lonely battle here, trying to get perspectives changed on appropriate treatment for the gender identity conflict. But I am working on a novel. Yes, there's a transgendered character in the story. That's primarily, I guess, what I would love to have time to finish.
Yes.
And it's amazing how much different writing fiction is from nonfiction. I think there are 17 or 19 pages of references.
Wow.
In 40 years to life, and even though it, in a sense, is autobiographical, still I'm using all of these other sources to tell different things about the story and about what people do or do not understand. The Queen Christina film is compelling for Garbo's fantastic acting in that part, but there have been other films. There was a Victor Victoria that sort of poked fun at gender identity conflict. There have been other attempts to tell the story, but here I'm not just trying to tell the story. I'm trying to make a point about the minority needing further research as far as the DNA modification, if that's possible, and for if no other reason, for better diagnostics that would convince people, well, we have scientific evidence here. We're not just relying on the opinion of mental health professionals, although mental health professionals certainly do an awful lot to try to become experts in their field. And something that's not quite functioning properly in our minds relative to us in the world is not something that can just be pulled out and shown to someone.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with gender identity conflict right now. We can't really prove that it happened. And there were 2 letters required. 2 mental health professionals had to sign off on the surgery I had, and I think the WPATH standards are the same. But it was absolutely indicated necessary, essential in my case, and it must be true that there are. We dare not assume that everybody else is like us, but we don't want to assume that everybody else is far different from us either.
Yeah.
And that certainly is the case with gender identity conflict. 40 years to life would give people a pretty good understanding, I think, of current knowledge about what the experience is, as told by somebody who lived it for over 4 decades. www.brendabradfordward.com is the website, and there are links there to other podcasts too. I don't want to talk about that. I'm on your program right now. But anyway.
This is the only interview that's worth listening to.
And maybe the only one where someone speaks the English tongue the way you do.
Yes.
Absolutely love it.
Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been very enlightening to have you on the show.
Oh, Toby, I've so enjoyed it. And I certainly hope your holidays are pleasant.